Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Software Delivery Leadership Forum. I'm Sam Fell. We'll be getting started in just a few minutes. Make sure we give folks a chance to join. We've got a very, very large group of registrants today. I'm really hoping that it's going to be a fantastic presentation. So sit tight. We'll be back in about 3 minutes. If I add this little thing where I can see the screen, does it block the slides at all? Do you see a gray box here or no? John?
You're good.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tracy. I like to see the faces of people. John's making weird googly eyes or something at me like, you're off track, go the other way.
This is where if I take my glasses off, you realize I wasn't wearing glasses.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're getting a good number of people coming in still. I want to go ahead and get started because we have an awful lot to cover. Again, thank you everybody for joining the Software Delivery Leadership Forum. It's just an open space for executives to talk about the software delivery lifecycle. My name is Sam Fell. I'm going to be joined by a few folks, and I'll introduce them in a second. What we're going to be talking about today is empowering teams with software delivery automation. And everybody understands and has heard the acronym CAMS or CALMS, Culture, Automation, Lean, Measurement, and Sharing. But a lot of executives overlook the importance of automation as a critical component of DevOps and continuous delivery. So in this episode of the SDLF, we're going to discuss where to begin your automation journey, how automation can help kickstart culture change, and methods that you can use today to help improve efficiency, governance, and security. I'm joined by John Collins, a VP of Research over at GigaOM. Hey, John.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm very well. I can say it's not raining in the UK today, so we're
Lovely.
very lucky there.
Lovely. So it's an international audience. We're also going to be joined during the second part of this program by some other practitioners, some other experts in the field to get their opinions on it as well. We also have quite a few experts online in the audience. So I'm talking to you specifically. The Software Delivery Leadership Forum is designed to be an interactive forum. We really want to hear your questions. We want to hear your answers to the questions that we're asking the panelists. So for the next hour or more, we're going to try and keep it to an hour because we're iterating all the time on the format here. It used to be an hour and a half. We were seeing some people leaving about an hour and 15 minutes in. So we're going to try and compress it a little bit. If you want to stay longer, you're welcome to, but we're again trying to make sure that this fits in with your life, which I know you've got a lot of stuff going on. We would ask that you stay engaged, ask questions, answer questions, and also be respectful, right? We really want to make sure that everybody feels safe to answer the questions, and then anyone who's being disrespectful will just be dismissed. So I'm going to start and get everybody warmed up a little bit and ask you to just put it in the chat. Where are you calling in from today? Where are you joining us from? And with that, I'm going to hand it off to John to have him go through some materials on automation. John.
Okay, well, first we've got to actually see if I've got any capability to use technology whatsoever. So hopefully by sharing this, you should now see my screen.
I can see your screen.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, I've passed the first test, so that gives me the right to give a presentation. So hello, everyone. I'm John Collins. I'm VP of Research at GigaOM, which is an industry analyst house. My personal area of coverage is development and operations, which we munge into one word, DevOps. The good news is when I had a proper job, I used to, at one point in my career, I was an agile development consultant. And at another point in my career, I was helping people with their ITIL implementations. And then I realized that I could just write about it and not break anything anymore. And that's where I became an analyst. So
you're much safer with a pen than a keyboard.
So I've done my time, but I'm not here to talk about myself. I'm here to essentially to set up for our fantastic panel and I want to get through this as quickly as possible so that we can open it up and get Tracy and Mitch and Anders and all the panelists to answer your questions and interact. So my job is essentially to talk about the role of automation in DevOps. We're here to talk about automation. DevOps is, as a lot of people know, the acronym CALMS. It's the A in CALMS. And in the discussions that we had before this, it became pretty clear that people often, we're all wanting to be collaborative. We're all wanting to be lean and agile and measure things and share and all that kind of thing. But automation, when I speak to organizations, it's almost like the poor nephew. It's the thing that gets left behind. And a lot of people are still struggling to automate even the basics. So what we're going to do here is talk about how automation can fit and where to make a difference with automation. And if I can find...
And we're going to do it in 15 minutes.
There we go. And I got 15 minutes to do it. So I thought, where do I start with all this automation thing? I've got 13 minutes now because I spent that long. I thought I'll go right back to the source, which is Augusta Ada King, Countess of Lovelace, who many see as the world's first programmer, but she was also one of the world's first technology visionaries, because when Charles Babbage moved his attention to a machine that could do one thing, to the analytical engine, a machine that could do many things, she realized just how much that was going to unleash creativity. And a very, very exciting time, as she said, not only the mental and the material, but the theoretically and the practical are brought into more intimate and effective connection. It's just the ability of software, which is what she was inventing, to instigate that level of creativity and innovation, which is fantastic. And so that's clearly demonstrating that the role of visionaries back then. I'd like to introduce another visionary as we move forward, though. Of course, the wonderful Mickey Mouse, who's the story of the Sorcerer's Apprentice. If everyone knows Fantasia, it's as old as King Midas, who had a similar issue with a magic touch, where everything King Midas touched turned to gold. Everything that the Sorcerer's Apprentice touched turned to a broom, which is fantastic. But what if you can't stop doing that? You end up with a lot of brooms. And if you map that onto lines of code, if you map that onto containers or libraries or artifacts, we're all very, very good at creating. You can see where I'm going with this. We're amazingly good at creating new stuff. That ephemerality of software is fantastic. But then we look back and we realize that we've just got so much that we don't know how to handle it all. And as a conversation with Tracy before came up with, it is absolutely the case with microservices, and we'll move on to that when we're talking about observability and pre-observability, or whatever we want to call that. As my mother used to say, you can have anything you like, but you can't have everything you like. So how do we get on top of this? And of course, automation can help, because if we can get the brooms to manage themselves, or if we can just have a broom management system, then we're onto something. But it's not just about our ability to create stuff. It's also about, and I think we're seeing this more and more with organizations in the COVID era. I was talking to an organization earlier, and they were saying that software had gone from a kind of, yeah, sure, it's great, when can we have it, to a, no, sure, it's absolutely something we need right now. The only way we're going to get out of this hole that we're now in as a business is to innovate ourselves out of it. So there's all these potential areas we can delve into. We've got cloud computing, we've got the platform, we've got things we can do with social, we've got the Internet of Things, we've got these massive telecoms infrastructures that we can build on. But how quickly can we deliver on that stuff? And the answer is a lot about innovation, because we don't know just where the next big thing is going to come from. So we've got to try lots of things. And if we're going to try lots of things, that adds to both the complexity of what we're trying to do, and it means we've got to be much, much better at measuring as we move forward. And I think a lot of big or older organizations, I'd love to hear what you have to say in the comments about this, and whether this is true for your organization. But a lot of the big organizations we speak to, they think they're somehow being lapped by by the startups because they appear from nowhere. The Netflixes of this world, even the Amazons, which is around for a while, but it's still driving like a tank through a lot of industries. And so there's this idea that all the money is going to go to the startups, and actually the older organizations are always going to struggle. But that's not actually true, because what they're not seeing, what we're all not seeing, is the fact that a lot of the only startups that we see, it's a bit like only seeing the pop stars. The only startups that we see are the successful ones, which is a tiny minority of the startups as a whole. But the good news about this is that that means that the businesses themselves, all businesses, be they startup, be they older organization, have an equal opportunity to innovate if only they can get on top of the challenges that that all organizations face. So if we do look at enterprises, what are the challenges that they face? Because a lot of enterprises, maybe your organization is the same, can have a little unit which is operating like a startup. It's doing everything right. It's doing all the exciting things. It's doing DevOps. It's doing clever things. It's got SREs. It's got all the right bits in place, etc., etc., etc. But it's sitting in isolation of the rest of the organization. So the question is how to scale that, outside of the little initiative, and how to take it to the wider organization. And when we try to do that, we hit what I've termed, and I've seen this term elsewhere as well, DevOps friction. It's easy to do the simple stuff. It gets harder and harder and harder to do the harder stuff. You start hitting quality assurance. You start talking about things like QA, about things like shift left in terms of getting that quality assurance done earlier. You start hitting communication issues. You start having to report on and fit compliance criteria. You start having to manage data, all kinds of things. And all your great aspirations that were curving off like this actually hit reality. And the number of organizations I speak to, they say, oh yeah, those guys over there, they're doing all the clever stuff, but they're not engaging with us. And some great initiatives can wither on the vine. And so scaling innovation best practice is really hard for large organizations. And this is where automation plays a huge role, not just to make that little gang of smaller group teams work better together, but then also to scale that innovation, to help share best practice, to help broaden delivery across the organization, to help that collaboration between IT and the business, and so on. And another area I wanted to touch on was then some of the notions that are less about technology and more about culture. I know this is one of your favorite phrases, Sam, culture eats strategy for breakfast, which so we can have all the great ideas in the world, but then we try to apply them. And I often see people, including myself, as the kind of the biggest blocker that we have to progress is you only need to look in the mirror in the morning. Yeah. And so what we can do with that is, here's an example. So fail fast is a great term that we hear the consultants bandy around. The idea behind fail fast is you try something, you fail, you learn, you try again, you fail, you learn a bit more. You can measure, you can do all kinds of clever things, and eventually, bang, it's the eighth thing that you tried. You've learned from it, you've got lots of experience, but also you got lucky. And it's that old, the harder you try, the luckier you get. Great theory, suddenly you're the next Netflix or the next Tesla or whatever it is. But actually reality looks a bit more like this in many organizations. You try, you fail, you hit your quarterly review, you get beaten up about it, you think, oh my goodness, that trying stuff. Really, I'm not that interested. So I think we're not here to talk about value stream management, which is a current very topic of mine, that area of focus. But the idea that you can actually measure everything that you're doing and then gain an insight onto that, both when you're trying and when you're failing, and then learn from that and then build on it. Again, it's another area that automation can really help. It can give that level of visibility onto onto everything you're doing. And of course, automation is both a horizontal and a vertical thing. I wrote a report a year or so ago about DevOps, and essentially the report was trying to work out all the things that were causing DevOps to fail. And out of the 15 areas, 3 of them could be labeled with automation, but actually automation hits every single area of software development. It hits when we're trying to connect existing systems, it hits collaboration, it hits security and privacy, it hits performance management, observability, it hits reporting. So it's every place that we're trying to do stuff. If we can remove the workload of doing it and make ourselves more efficient, then we will be better at able to deliver on that innovation. So I wanted to take all of that and put it into terms that are actually things we're trying to address right now. Because what have I talked about? I've talked about the ability, the need to innovate. I've talked about the need to try new things and test them out, etc., etc. And I've talked about the need to automate them. And feature flags are a big thing that's coming up at the moment as a way of testing out new ideas. And what I thought I'd do is think about feature flags from the perspective of where we are in the history of technology. And one of the things that I often think about is, how are we going to look back on this? Are we going to see feature flags, for example, as the latest new thing that's kind of, it'll free us from all those shackles? Or is it just another chisel in the history of technology tooling, and we're still a long way from getting to lathe level of tooling? So with feature flags, there's really 3 things that drove the origin story of feature flags. If-def, SCCS, and tagging, which I'll cover very briefly. But what I'm doing is I'm just using this as a way of showing that a lot of the things that we're seeing as new are actually tools that we've had for a while that we're now pulling together in a way that we can deliver new things with them. So, and
John, I just want to do a time check. We're 15 minutes in.
We're 15 minutes in, so I'll finish off here. So the first thing that you need to know about feature flags is that their origin story was 45 years ago with Doug McElroy. That was another great visionary, and the language PL1. And if anyone's used diff, you'll know Doug McElroy, and you'll say thank you to him. Second thing is the SCCS and the origins of both versioning and tagging, which gives us that ability to label and create features and then put them out there. And then the only final thing that I wanted to talk about, which I'll summarize with, is the brave new world as we're seeing it. And this links into some of the things that Tracy's doing and Mitch is doing and our other panelists. It is that suddenly we're hitting the world of microservices. We're seeing a lot of interest there. I'll let you read the slide, but there's interest across the board for different applications from Kubernetes and microservices. That's going to generate a whole new set of innovations, a whole new set of challenges, and a whole new need for new types of automation. So with that, I'll wrap up, and I'm going to hand over to our panel. I'll say it's a lot about structure, it's a lot about automation, but it's about getting stuff in such a way that you're making yourself more efficient so that you can deliver on that innovation for the future. So I'll hand back over to you, Sam, on that note, and you can pick it up.
Lovely. So I am going to stop your screen sharing and start mine. I'm going to pull this up, and if I could ask the other panelists to please join us on camera, that would be lovely. And we'll go through a few introductions. So John, thank you for that. Great primer on sort of some of the history of automation. Certainly an important topic. You asked an interesting question while we're doing the introductions. You talked about, a lot of folks like to make new things, but they don't like to get rid of old things. So I'm going to ask a question to the attendees while we're doing introductions. When was the last time you set a project on moving forward to decommission a large application as opposed to trying to bring one up? And I'd love to hear the responses on that. And while you're responding, I'm going to do a couple of introductions here. We have John Collins to help set the table, but we've got some real practitioners to help us tear into things. And so I'd want to have Tracy introduce herself.
Okay, I am Tracy Reagan. I am the CEO and co-founder of Deploy Hub. We do microservice configuration management. If you think about doing monolithic builds and getting bill of material reports and impact analysis reports and diff reports, we do that in a microservices world. We also have an open source project called Ortelius, or Abraham Ortelius was the first map maker, and basically that's what we're doing.
Nice. And you're also involved with the CDF, the Continuous
I
Delivery.
am a board member of the CD Foundation, and I'm also a DevOps Institute ambassador.
Lovely. Well, we're thrilled to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Madhu.
Hi, my name is Madhu Datla. I'm a senior software engineering manager for DevOps, systems engineering, and release management solutions here at Intel. I've spent more than a decade developing systems for speeding up our software delivery process. So DevOps and automation is, pretty close and near and dear to my heart. I'm glad to be part of the panel discussion today, and looking forward to share perspectives and answer questions from the audience.
Beautiful. Madhu, thank you for joining us. Mitch, a familiar face. Hello again.
Great to see you again, Sam, and great to be part of this wonderful panel. Appreciate John's introductory slides there, comments. My name is Mitch Ashley. I'm CEO, founder of Accelerated Strategies Group, which is an analyst firm and takes an open source approach to distributing our content and our knowledge. You can find out more about that later. But anyway, we focus on digital transformation, cloud native architectures, DevOps, of course, and then cybersecurity.
Awesome. Mitch, great to see you again. And Anders, last but not least.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anders Wahlgren, VP of Technology Strategy here at CloudBees. I joined about a year ago. I came on board as part of the Electric Cloud acquisition. I was the Chief Technology Officer for the last years at Electric Cloud. Worked a lot on building our CD product there. So all of these things, automation, orchestration, is nearer and dearer to my heart than most things probably, which may not be healthy, but it's fun.
Awesome. So I want to put up our first question, and I'm going to pick on one of you to go first. But the question here, the prompt is, and this is for the folks in the audience as well, we would love to hear your thoughts on this. When you think about DevOps, people, process, and technology, where are we right now? What are we focused on? What's working well? What's not working well? And where are we going? I love John's slide where he said, think about looking back at where we are today, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. What will people say about our level of maturity and the things that we're doing? The ability to forward integrate. That was a fantastic, I love that. I love that slide. So I'm going to start with, let's see, I started with Tracy on the introductions. I'm going to start with Madhu. Madhu, what are your thoughts? People, process, and technology, and specifically at Intel or just in general and what you're seeing in the market? Doesn't have to be Intel.
Yeah, absolutely. The DevOps process itself has been around for at least more than a decade or even more, right? I think the systems and tools that we have right now are pretty much capable of supporting several use cases. But the key thing is the tools are evolving constantly, right? They're evolving rapidly. And one of the things we have started looking at is to determine what is that stack going to look like every couple of years. And what we found is, the process that we have defined needs to be reinvented and optimized every few years so that we continue to evolve along with the software engineering practices and transform along with the industry, right? When it comes to the technology, what I'm seeing is there is a whole lot of tool consolidation that I'm seeing as a trend. Like there are tools which are really, really good at development experience, or data storage tools, or data analytics tools. But in order to provide the best developer experience or best way of releasing our software to external customers, one of the things that I'm seeing is more of these tools, specialized tools, are going to become more and more generic in their capabilities, with a lot of other offerings included. And we are seeing that with GitHub, which is not only the source control but also trying to do artifact management, CI/CD solutions and a lot more things like that, right? So that's where I think the technology will evolve, a little bit of more consolidation of the features. And obviously the containerization and Kubernetes is a huge trend right now. And I would continue to expect that would evolve.
Right. Fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely a trend where people are looking for more platformy type solutions to solve more problems, to solve more of those end-to-end problems for sure with automation, and that could be very helpful. Awesome. Tracy, what are your thoughts? Where are we with automation, people, process, technology? Where are we? We got a great note from John. He says, people. It's more hard to change people than it is to change technology. But can technology be used to help promote a culture change?
Well, Kubernetes is forcing us to do that, to be quite honest. Even if we let's just talk about the CD pipeline. And we always say CI/CD, right? But more and more we're dropping off the term CI and it's just CD. Well, why is that? We're not doing monolithic builds anymore. We're doing microservices. Even the idea of branching and merging source code is going to change. While we really relied on it when we were writing monolithic because we needed to be able to have one piece of code that 3 or 4 developers could work on, and you could branch it and you could figure out what you wanted to add for that particular release. That's all gone. We're not going to be thinking in that way anymore. It's literally going away with microservices. When you start thinking about how microservices is disrupting what we do, you realize that we're going through a really big shift. We're in a massive disruption right now in how we write software, how we deliver software. And when I say deliver, I'm not just talking about calling a Helm chart and pushing it out to a cluster. I'm talking about tracking the change request. Now a change request associated to a microservice, not a monolithic. How do you do testing? How do you do testing if you have one microservice that's impacted 10 applications in your environment? Do you execute all of the workflows every single time? And the concept even of a pipeline, even though we use it and it's a great term, that's going to go away. Because we're going to be looking at an event-driven world, and potentially instead of having a check-in be the trigger, it's going to be when you create a new container, and it's going to be based on a container registry. And then once that container is created, there are going to be events that are executed, and they're all executed at the same time. There's not a concept of a job scheduling like workflow anymore. So we are going to be forced to do this. We may not want to do it because and I put up a slide recently, everybody has a CI/CD pipeline. And then I put a slide up of Monty Python where they're going, hey, we're in search of the Holy Grail. And it's like the French go, yes, we've got one. It's quite nice. Well, we're kind of right there. That's where we are at right now in this process. We've got one. It's really nice, but guess what? Our quest is not over, and we're about to hit a tsunami of changes in this particular part of software development.
Yeah, and to Madhu's point, he has to reinvent that process all the time as new technology. We're getting, Alfonso says, continuous and impressive advancement, improvement on technical aspects and process, but not as much on cultural change. And that is absolutely true. Culture is really, really hard. People are hard. People are not as easy to program as computers are, right? And they don't give the same exact response to the same exact input on different days, which is also tricky. Awesome, Tracy, thank you. John, what are your thoughts on this?
What, this John?
John Collins.
Is there another? Well, I'm kind of, it's a really tricky one because it always seems to be left to the bar at the end of every conversation. It's like, although we see it as the most important thing, we still don't see it as the first thing to be discussed. We'll still try and implement a tool, or we'll try and change the process. I kind of agree with Tracy that the world is changing. I think that it's actually, there's a danger for older organizations to kind of believe that the way that the world's changing is going to leave them even further behind. But I actually believe that it's converging to a place that they would like to be anyway, which is a real positive, because a lot of the old ways of building software were actually very modular. And so if we go back to a notion of modularity being a kind of first-class citizen, and we've seen this through OO, we've seen it through CVD, we've seen it through, you know, all kinds of things. I think that gives us a really good structure to start building against. So we don't have to say, the world's changed, you guys need to catch up. We can say, the world's changing and you guys might like it. And
so John, though, to your point here, and to, I think to Tracy's point, is that changing of how the work is happening and how it's being distributed requires that culture change. But having tools like Ortelius, right, that can help you understand what's happening, I think that enables the culture to change. You can't change the culture if people are saying, there's some random stuff happening and I'm feeling pretty good about it, right? The culture change will come when it's, I understand what's happening and I'm feeling pretty good about it, because the automation is helping me do that.
It takes me back to a big argument I had with an SAP sales specialist decades ago, he said, the tool defines the process and the culture. And then you saw what happens, which, you know, sort of millions of dollars spent on consultants to make the tools fit the process and the culture.
That's with a B, right? Millions with a B. Is that what you said?
And so I'm a firm believer that good tools understand the process and culture and help enable it. And of course, there needs to be a meeting in the middle. There's terminology that's new. There's kind of just little small things that make a big difference that are new. But the tooling should be flexible enough to adapt to the way people want to work rather than the other way around. And that's what opinionated is a really useful word, because it's not saying prescriptive.
Right.
It's saying guardrails. It's saying, you know, here's the edges, let's work within them, as opposed to you've got to go down that path.
Yeah, get really good at going down the blue slopes before you go off piste. Mitch, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I don't think I want to delve into do you adapt the tool to the process, the process the tool. That's a whole nother parallel track John was mentioning. You know, as I step back, I think about what's happening all around us. And what's happening around us is not one way that's going to solve all our problems, but many ways of creating software and working and living in a software world. But it's not just customer experience now, it's also evolving into employee experience, staff experience, because of all the dynamic ways that we work now. But if you really think about holistically the whole software spectrum that we work in, yes, it's Kubernetes and cloud native and microservices and architectures, things like that. It's in the cloud. It's also low code. It's also robotic process automation. It's also mainframe and monolithic applications. That's really the spectrum of what's empowering and enabling us to do the work that we do, and helping us get services to market and do all of that. So when you step back, then if that's what we're creating is the software to help us enable our businesses and ourselves to work, then it's about how we create it. It's DevOps, it's Agile, it's enterprise architectures, it's different things that help us get there. So ultimately, it all takes people to do it, to do work, but I don't think any one technology is the next savior of what we're doing. As excited as I am about microservices and Kubernetes and everything else, it fits into a larger kind of canopy of different art technologies that are really all part of the solution.
Lovely. And I think John Parkinson, he just mentioned a great thought. If you can't make a new way to work easier to do right than wrong, then it won't get adopted. And this is sort of making the right thing the path of least resistance. And this is an idea that I've heard people talk about all the time. I think it's a lovely, lovely idea that empowers the developers to do the right thing. And it also happens to help make sure that they can leave on time, right? I mean, these are all the things that people want to try and do. Anders, I haven't heard yet from you on this. What's your thoughts on people, process, technology? Where are we? Where are we going?
Yeah, a couple of things. Just sort of, you know, looking back on history a little bit as opposed to looking forward. But as a means of looking forward, you know, you think back to when the Berlin Wall fell, and there's a very famous to me anyway, front page of, it was probably Time or Newsweek or, one of those magazines that used to exist back in the day when there were magazines. And the huge headline across the top was, Berlin Wall falls. Is this the end of history? Right. And of course, no.
Was
some people were arguing that. And so I think, Kubernetes and microservices are awesome, but it's not the end of history, right? There will be other new technologies that come along and are probably equally disruptive, low code, no code, whatever the case may be. But we've come a long way. I mean, I remember a discussion with Ray Ozzie, who was one of the people who wrote Lotus Notes way back in the day, talking about what their development process was back then. And this would have been late 80s, early 90s. They would basically have each engineer go off on their own for 6 weeks and write code. And then they would come back together and then spend the next, I think, probably 6 weeks just trying to integrate that. And so the notion of continuous integration just didn't exist back then. And then kind of fast forward a little bit to 2004, when we were just getting started with Electric Cloud. I remember doing a seminar with John Osterhout, who's one of the co-founders of Electric Cloud. And we were talking about how to make builds faster so that you could do more of them and do continuous integration. And this person from the back of the room, kind of raises their hand and says, yeah, right. That's actually not what they said. I'm just joking with Sam here, but they said, why do we want all these builds? We're not going to test them. This was a quality person who was saying this. We don't have time to test all these builds. Why bother, right? So you kind of have to have that discussion of what it's for and why we're trying to do it and those sorts of things. And of course now, I'd be hard pressed to find a person who's going to argue against continuous integration being a valuable process and a valuable tool. But it helps to look back and kind of look at what we thought about certain things in the past and what we think about them now in order to think a little bit about what's coming down the pike. And Kubernetes and microservices are awesome, but as we saw with some things, there's that kind of famous example of kind of skipping technologies, right? Lots of the world in the sense of telecommunications skipped over copper infrastructure completely. They weren't developed enough when copper was being laid in the rest of the world to be able to do it, but then came wireless and mobile. And so they just never bothered laying down the copper infrastructure. They jumped straight. So there's going to be, and as much as we talk about Kubernetes and microservices, it's, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's a minority of software in the world that's written using that technique still. So it'll be interesting to see if there's kind of that next leap across that. I'm not predicting that will happen, but some other thing will come along and disrupt that as well. And that'll be interesting to see what that is.
I remember a conversation with a very large bank a few years ago who said, yeah, we've looked at our application landscape and we think we can probably containerize about 20% of them. And during that process of trying to containerize that 20%, all of a sudden serverless came out. And they're like, oh, well, as part of that 20% and maybe some of this other 80%, maybe there's 5% that we can probably make serverless. And there's, like Andrew said, there's always going to be something new. And this Satish, Mitch, you were responding to Satish. You said, yeah, we create software using all the new technologies, but it rarely can happen when we leave everything else behind. You have to drag all the old stuff behind with you because it's critical. That was my question around when's the last time you started a project to decommission an app, and only one person responded. Thank you very much for your response, but that either tells me you're apathetic or that you're just not doing it, which I would think that you're not an apathetic crowd. I think you're just probably not planning on decommissioning applications because that's really hard work.
And also, I mean, the question I would ask as a sort of a follow-on to that is, never mind applications, when was the last time you retired an entire technology stack or tool chain? When did you get rid of an operating system? When did you get rid of a language or a framework or something like that, which is probably even less common? Because it's difficult, changing the tire on the car while you're driving down the freeway is difficult. And you can't really pull over by the side of the road and tell your customers, come back in 6 months, we'll have something really wonderful for you. Unless you're MoviePass, I guess, if you're familiar with that story, but that didn't work out so well.
Right.
And I want to point out too that while we constantly are in a transition mode, we have been for quite some time, there are consistent features about what we do that stay the same. We always have an operating system. We always have software that we're creating, how it's created, whether it be using Salesforce or whether we're doing microservices or we're doing Java. We have that step. So there's a consistency across every single change that we've made. If we go back and we really look at DevOps and we go, what's the first DevOps tool on the market? Most people would guess it was something on the mainframe, and it was named Environment for Developers and Operations. It's called Endeavor. It's the first CI tool, CI/CD tool ever put on the market. And if we look at that and we look at what we're doing today, whether it be something we're doing in the mainframe or something we're doing in a microservices environment or something more traditional and monolithic, the constructs are still identical. So as we change, they stay, the more things change, the more things stay the same. We are going through that. And our challenge is to identify what it is that we need as a consistent to be successful, no matter how much we wobble in terms of the technology, because we hope that I am very happy to kind of be handing off to a new generation microservices, something that's fault tolerant, self-healing. We've worked on that for basically my entire career, and there will be something that replaces it, but we will still have those consistent practices and procedures and things that we always have to do will always stay the same. What are they, and how do we make sure that we're still doing them every time we make a change? And that cultural shift requires us to think of solving the same problem in a new way, but we have to remember it's still the same problem. It's still doing a deployment. It's still doing testing. It's still doing configuration management. It just looks different. It's not necessarily that drastically different. It just looks different.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. A lot of really good points there, and some really, really good comments from the audience as well. I really appreciate that. We talked a little bit about sort of automation helping with culture, and it doesn't change the culture, but it can help, right? Having those guardrails, as John mentioned, and making sure that the easy path is going to be the path that's the most secure, the most reliable, the most predictable. And then Tracy, you talked about sort of all these things that are not changing, but all the technology that is changing, the principles and the methods for manufacturing. We just did an SDLF last month, excuse me. If you haven't seen it, I recommend you go back with an analyst, Charlie Betts from Forrester, where he talked about all those things, about how we're borrowing manufacturing paradigms. Lean, Madhu brought that up when we were talking. I had CAMS, C-A-M-S. I had not put lean in. And Madhu's like, well, you got to put lean in there, right? Because that's part of the whole process. And his whole point was we have to reinvent our pipeline and our process all the time to accommodate new tooling. But the fundamentals of getting early feedback, testing things, these things don't change.
They don't.
Awesome.
They don't.
Go ahead, John.
Can I throw something in? There was a great analogy that an analyst who wasn't me came up with a while back, but it always sticks in my head at moments like this, which is when we think about the scale of the challenge that we're dealing with. He talked about it's a bit like mining, and when you're mining, you go, the deepest mine is a kilometer down. You think, wow, I've gone down an awfully, I'm so deep into the earth right now, I can almost feel the lava ball beneath my feet. But actually, if the earth's like that, you've gone down this kind of tiny amount. And so when we think we're kind of, and that's what complexity looks like for the enterprise. If you look at any large organization's software map, it's just the most phenomenally complex thing. And to try and address it as a whole is nigh on impossible. So we've got to just recognize it's not there. There isn't going to ever be a thing that's going to just resolve that overnight. But when I speak to organizations, a thing that us analysts can often get very wrong is that we talk about this stuff so often that we think that people already get it. And when we take something like automation, for example, Tracy, to your point, it's moving from CI to CD. Maybe that's true. A lot of people still aren't doing CI right. They're still on the early kind of the on-ramps to getting any of this right. So yeah. I think we have to take them on a journey from the beginning And that culture change can't happen from middle to end. They're not already at level 4 and we can take them to level 5. We've got to start at level 1. And there's one last thing, and it's a point back to Randy, who said about how do we actually implement some of that? And Randy, you just asked, do you start with automation first? I think there's a real benefit to start with efficiency first. So look for the bottlenecks, look for the things that aren't working right, and identify them and address them as a way of freeing up time and freeing up energy and space. And that's why I mentioned the Statue of David analogy, because when Michelangelo was asked how did he sculpt the Statue of David out of a block of rock, he said, I just removed all the bits that weren't David.
Right.
And I think that's if you can remove all the things that are happening in your organization that aren't innovation, then you're on to a really good start.
Love that. I love that. Yeah, Randy, your question is quite on point. I'm going to actually just roll with that one as our next question. We have about 15 minutes left until the end of the hour. I'm happy to stay a little bit longer if you folks are. But let's dive into this. So where should folks start that journey? And Madhu, you had some very, very good comments there. You want to roll those out for folks?
Yeah, I think the CAMS model is a good framework to refer to, right? Culture, automation, lean, measurement and sharing, and each of these have specific guidelines that the different teams can follow. But I personally believe that culture plays a big role in any change management or any transformation, especially in the current situation where there is so much focus on doing further digital transformation, right? One thing that I would absolutely caution is to not just take the existing process and throw a bunch of tools at those and expect that it is going to work. Every time we're trying to bring in a new change, it's a good opportunity for us to take a look at why are we really doing this, right? Are we going to get the expected results by incorporating these additional tools or automating certain activities there? Never automate the existing manual process if they are not very effective currently. So it's very, very important to make sure that we understand the effectiveness of the existing process. Going back to that culture along with the automation, I think you need to have buy-in from not only from your executive team, but also from the other leaders, people on the front lines and other folks who actually make things happen. And not having that buy-in is going to be a biggest roadblock. And making sure that as you implement some of these changes, you're constantly measuring whether the changes that are being put in place are effective or not, and trying to shorten that feedback loop so that we can continuously evolve the processes that are being used in the organization. So those are some of the things that I would look at, right? Before just saying, yep, let's just automate, let's look at different things that contribute to making your organization successful. Look at the culture, look at the existing process, and make sure that you're measuring constantly and evolving as you go.
Love it. Makes sense. All right, let's see. John, I'm going to pick on you. Where should people start?
Well, I don't want to repeat myself. I think
give us the one prescriptive answer, John. Come on.
One prescriptive answer: design thinking. There you go. Look it up. Read about it. Deliver on it. So start with the end in mind. It's one of the 7 habits. So work out what. Don't try and solve all the problems. Identify something that you do want to do. Identify something that you do want to build, and start building it.
Yeah.
And use that as your crystalline solute.
Yeah. Anders wrote that exact same thing in the chat. Find the thing in your shoe that bothers you, the pebble that bothers you, and then get rid of it. Maybe a process problem, maybe a tooling problem, and maybe a...
But I think I'd link the two, because, and I completely agree with Anders, but do it with a goal in mind as well. So don't just try and solve a problem. Try and solve a problem at the same time as saying, as we deliver on that roadmap feature, whatever it is, let's address that challenge. And then you're getting a double whammy.
Lovely. All right. Tracy.
Thinking about
Oh,
outcomes is key. Yeah, I'll just throw this in here quickly. Sorry, Tracy. I mean, thinking about outcomes is key. So I'm glad, John, that you raised that, because you know, you want to have a destination in mind. You want to have sort of a hill that you can point to and say, we want to go there. And because without that, everybody's going to just sort of run off in their own direction. So that's key too.
Ray Ozzie model. Mm-hmm. Although they knew where they were going, but they still weren't getting that feedback fast.
Well, you know, it was the technology at the time. You work with the tools you got.
Yeah. Now there's some organizations that are still doing nightly builds, but they were doing like monthly, 6 weekly. Is that kind of how it goes?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, Tracy. Sorry about that.
You want me to answer this question or a new one?
Oh, well,
I have thoughts on this question. You know, when I usually work with companies who are saying they want to do DevOps, everybody's already doing DevOps, right? They're just doing it in different ways. And we can talk about what DevOps means, but if we just take the core and understand that every single application team out there has somebody on their team who has been playing the role of what we now call a site reliability engineer. There's no team out there that doesn't have somebody on their team who has access to production and fixes it and works in combination with the operations team, because the operation teams can't figure out how to fix somebody's application. So we've always done something like this in the business of delivering software. So if you want to really get started, sometimes it's the best way to start is to look just at what you're currently doing and define it, name it, identify those people and what their roles are, because that gives you a understanding of where you already are, because a lot of this stuff has been done in a very grassroots way in the past, and teams continue to do it in a grassroots way. Jenkins is a perfect example. That was a grassroots effort. How many people really did a POC to implement Jenkins? Not very many, I don't think. So look at what you're currently doing and give that give it a moment and understand what the culture's already, what you're doing as a company and what your culture is. And then you can begin building around that and look to see where you want to be and how to get the teams to that place. But I feel like oftentimes we really do ignore what's already been done. And some of these teams have done amazing work. Some of them, if you look at an organization, some of them will be kind of way down on the level of just getting their CI figured out. And some of them are way off the chart on their CD kind of growth model. So look at what you're currently doing. Look at the structures you currently have and give credit where credit's due and start there. But you do have to have the vision. You have to have an idea of where you want to be. And you're going to have somebody help you with that too. I mean, you have to have somebody who is in charge of what that vision is, whether it be an architect or somebody at a director level, but start where you are.
Yeah, and Mitch, I think you've got some interesting comments also about what's the end that you're looking for? What's the end that you have in mind?
It's really interesting to what Tracy is saying. Flow and momentum of the organization is huge. Align with what the organization does well already, or what the kind of DNA of the organization is. If it works that way, use that to your advantage, right? You know, if there's already a swing that's happening, put the ball in front of the racket, right? So, and part of that too is get outside of our IT shell and think about not just what the end that's in mind that you're starting from, but what's the ultimate value that's important to the business, and not just IT, but important to the business and its customers, what the business values, and work backwards from that. And you're not ever starting with a clean slate. You're really about aligning maybe what you're already doing to be able to create line of sight between ultimately what matters and why does it matter. And then maybe we have to reprioritize some things. So kind of two different thoughts there, but it's not an easy problem. I don't think any of us are saying that it is, but I think if people understand the why and where we're going in whichever order, it's huge. That's hugely valuable. And then folks can make decisions in their environment on their own to be able to help accomplish what we're all working towards.
Alignment, right. It's all about alignment for sure. And I love, John, your example about the mining. And we talk about different tools and different teams and different things. If you're trying to mine something that's 3 inches deep, you need different tooling and different structure and different, you know, different scaffolding than if you're trying to go however many kilometers down. So it's a different whole thing in a large organization than in a much smaller organization. So the role of automation enables that mining to happen that you would normally not be able to do at that scale if you couldn't lift the dirt out. Otherwise, you'd just be lifting the dirt and putting it back in your same hole, right? Awesome. So let's jump into another, one more question here. And the last one, I'm going to actually skip this one. What are your biggest obstacles? And go to how is automation impacting the way you run either your department or your entire business, right? And how have you seen that impact? What impact does it have, the automation? I think that would be an interesting one. And so, I don't know, anyone want to volunteer? I don't want to ask, I don't want to.
I'll be happy to volunteer on that one.
Great.
You know, everybody has a different experience with this, what the impact is. I mean, if we think about where we are trying to go, where we're really trying to go, sort of like what the CD Foundation talks about, is delivering software, you know, faster and more secure. We want to get new innovation out to our end users as quickly as we possibly can. But that means different things to different organizations. Financial companies have a stricter compliance levels than a small startup does. So it's not the same for everybody. And what I always suggest is building out what I like to call a compliance scorecard. What do you want to achieve in your automation? From a, and when I say compliance, kind of sounds like a, you know, a 4-letter word, but it really isn't. It is, what do you want to see happen for anything running in your production environment? Should it have a security scan? What levels of testing should it have? How smart do you want to make that process? Does everything have to go through a standard kind of workflow with approvals? So build out a clear compliance scorecard. And the easiest way to do that is to look at the team that's delivering code the fastest with the least downtime. You know, they're updating without failure. Look at that team and start defining what that automation needs to look like. Because the answer to that question is in the question, I think. It's, we get automation out of it. But what does that automation look like? And it's going to be completely different for every team. I talk about this quite often because I feel like we're at a point in time in terms of our continuous delivery process where we need to be creating smart workflows. We need to be able to look at a microservice and say, this microservice has a high impact level. If we release it, it is going to impact 10 or 15 applications. So let's push that information back to the workflow and let the workflow engine decide which actual workflow it should execute. If this is a feature flag that's just going, it's a web component, it's not going to impact a lot of people, then let's push it through a different kind of a workflow. So automation is what you get out of it. And that is what we're all trying to achieve, because automation gives us faster updates to our end users. And with the amount of software that we need to write over the course of the next 15 years, we have to get really fast at it. We're not going to do it manual. You know, most people can't do CI properly because they're still running manual build scripts. That has been a huge bottleneck for every single company that's tried to do CI properly. One of the last DevOps worlds that we were all in person last year, I think Jez Humble asked who can do a 10-minute build, and maybe 5 people in a room full of maybe 500 raised their hands. So automation, we get automation out of it, and automation is what's going to allow us to push this envelope to a point where we're building the next set of AI tools, machine learning, and getting us to a modern architecture that will survive any kind of pandemic.
Here's a great comment from one of our attendees, John. He says, automation has helped us. Oops, it's too many folks are chatting here. I'm losing my thing. Automation has helped us a lot. A, helped us a lot, and B, guaranteed that our failures are extremely serious in terms of business impact. Right? You're starting to depend on this automation. You're starting to rely on this stuff working. And when it doesn't work, then you know, stuff hits the fan pretty good. He says, as MTBF, mean time between failures, improves, the mean time to resolution approaches infinity. And Tracy, this goes back to maybe your Artilius project and how we're trying to map what these dependencies are. And then there's the 2015 tweet from DevOps Borat, who says, you know, trying to troubleshoot a problem in a production Docker Kubernetes environment, it's sort of like a murder mystery, right? Who done it and why and where? It's not obvious. And so that observability is pretty key. So let's see. Thank you, Tracy, for that. Who else wants to comment on this topic? What's the impact? Madhu, Mitch, Anders, John?
I'll jump in just real quick. You know,
ahead.
mic drop, by the way, Tracy. Love what you said.
Thank you.
Yeah, you know, I think there's lots of reasons to do automation, but I think one of the big drivers for me is always helping everyone move on to higher value work, either because it's work that they enjoy or work that's more valuable. Why spend time doing something we can automate, where you can actually take that knowledge then and use it to something else? So that's always a great driver. And I think it gives personal satisfaction to the individuals, provided they know that you're not automating it because they don't value them. You do value them. And it also brings value, of course, to the work and to the business and customer outcomes, things like that. So I'll just throw that in there. I can't outdo what Tracy said. That's my top territory.
Thank you.
Perfect. I love it.
I think
Maybe
that,
I'll just add something really
ahead.
quick. Sorry, Andres, you want to go ahead?
Go ahead,
go
Matt.
Okay. Yeah. So adding on to what Mitch mentioned, right? Automating the low value activities so we could free up people to do something more meaningful is extremely important, because it also brings a lot of satisfaction to the software engineers as well, right? They all love solving problems, and no one likes to just, you know, click the same button over and over again, right? Specifically, in my recent experience, we automated a lot of our infrastructure management to just reduce the amount of time we're spending on resolving the infrastructure related issues using some of the new technologies. And that's something that I have spent a ton of time automating, and it is paying a huge dividends right now, right? So there are opportunities like that where there are a bunch of low-hanging fruit which we can always identify, and then make sure we automate everything we can that's freeing up resources. And now the same group of people have extended their skills into do more of the coding, as well as understanding some of the other pieces of the solution. And we are, you know, getting more productive because we have automated, you know, part of our process.
Excellent. Very good. Anders, you were going to say something also?
yeah, I think it, you know, I think it was interesting. I love that thing about how as our mean time between failure goes down, our mean time to recovery approaches infinity, which good problem to have, first of all. But I think it's interesting too, because that really talks about how, you know, we have to be careful about metrics and how we use them, right? Because you could easily, as an outsider, look at that and say, oh, look, your MTTR is completely out of control. And the answer to that is, well, we fixed all the easy problems. Now we're working on the hard ones. And without that sort of context, and with the general idea that, look, the outcome we're trying to get to is this, you know, you could easily see how those sort of stats could be used in an organization, especially in a less enlightened culture, let's say, to sort of bash the teams that are working on these problems. And quite frankly, I'm not even sure that I agree 100% that, you know, as your failure rates go down, that the problems become more difficult to solve. Some of them certainly do. And there are ways that you can hose yourself there too. I mean, I've experienced a few times where engineers will fix a bug, which is, you know, it's a data race or some obscure, you know, multi-threading kind of bug. And since they don't really understand how the problem is occurring, what they end up doing is they kind of close the window of opportunity for the bug to appear. Well, what's really happened now is, instead of that thing happening once every 1,000 times, it now happens once every 100,000 times. And now you've completely screwed yourself, right? Because it's going to happen that, you know, it's still going to happen at the customer site, only now you have a much harder time to reproduce the problem. So, you know, we always have to be careful and rigorous in how we fix problems. And that's one of the things I harp on is, if you can't reproduce the problem, you should be careful about how you fix it. because you may just be making it more difficult to reproduce, and all you're doing is kind of pushing it off into the corner and making it more difficult.
Can I throw something in on the back of that?
Yes, you can, and actually, you'll be the last one. So make it good, John. Don't. Yeah.
Well, so I'll make it a good one. I think everything's great, and this has been such a great panel to participate in. Thank you so much for letting me join this illustrious group. The fact of the matter is that none of the things that we're saying will ever make life easy. There isn't this place where if you do everything right, this time next year, it's all just happening easily. And there's several reasons for that. One is the fact that it's always going to stay that complex, and there's always going. But the other thing is innovation doesn't wait. It doesn't kind of slow down. You just want to do more of it. So it's a bit like when you start training for a race. The faster you get, you just still feel as tired as you're doing it, but you're still getting faster. And so the important thing is, yeah, focus on the fact you're getting faster, but don't think you're going to have an easier time. But within that, I think that my kind of last word on the subject is we've talked about culture change. Some of that should definitely come from within. And I would say to anyone, any participant on this panel or anyone listening in later, if you can take the time out of what you're doing, stop, fall back, regroup, check how you're getting on, make sure that you're focused on the right things, make sure it is about value, as Mitch says, make sure you are doing the right things, make sure that your automation is delivering and that you're measuring the right things. Because if you're not doing it for yourself, no one else is necessarily going to do it for you. So sure, we can build culture across the organization, but we can start by just at the end of every week, have your own sprint, have your own stop, pause, think, fall back, regroup, and just checks and balances for yourself. There you go.
Lovely. Awesome. John and panelists, thank you so much for joining. This has really been a fantastic conversation. I'm seeing a lot of people talking about how much fun we have on these. I love these. This is the best part of my month, to just learn from you folks and to have the conversation with the audience. Thank you to the attendees who participated in the chat. We really appreciate that. We would also, we've put a link in there. My colleague Selena put a link in there for some feedback. We are iterating all the time and trying to make this better for the audience. That's the why question. Why are we doing this? Is to help you guys, you folks, get educated on topics that you care about. So send some feedback and then also join the conversation. The Software Delivery Leadership Forum is actually going to be, Mitch and the Accelerated Strategies group are chairing our DevOps World Leadership track. And the DevOps World is actually going to be virtual this year, September 22nd through 24th. Go to DevOps World and cloudbees.com/DevOps World and sign up. You can join these kinds of sessions. We have a whole host of folks from the ecosystem. Again, independent programming chair, ASG, is helping to put together a program that really, it's not about product. It's really just about helping folks learn all of the stuff that we talked about and more. So thank you so much for joining. We will see everybody on next month's SDLF, where we're talking about communication, collaboration, and rapid response through software. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.